Sure. So the parts that stuck out to me in the book, well, firstly, I'm not as amped on economics as the both of you guys are, I suppose. So the part that stuck out for me is that when I started reading, I realized, oh, this is a book about history. So, and I'm a big fan of history. And my favorite part about history and what this book shows is that nothing much is actually new. The social, political, and the economic issues that exist in the past, they often exist now too. In the book, you even quote Mark Twain, where you say, history may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. This is evidenced by many things in the book itself. You also you talk about the similarities between the Great Depression and the Great Recession. History will also show us how the nationalizing of lands and banks has gone, and that's relevant now to some issues because some political parties, obviously advocate for that. So what I will commend about the book is that it's actually a meaningful gateway into the future. I also found the book quite useful because it has some actually a lot of very interesting factoids, which I hope to remember when I enter for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Like, for instance, now I know that Mansa Musa existed in the 14th century. He was incredibly rich. He was a generous gift giver. All of these factoids about Africa, they're interesting too as well. So you went into a lot of detail, and I'm sure a lot of research went into this. So we commend you for that.
Yeah, thanks. I think, so the Mansa Musa is interesting because at the beginning of every year in my class, in my second year class, I start with the test, which is not always very, students, they get this kind of fright when I say we're going to start with the test. But I basically show them a map of Africa and a blank map, basically just the country outlines. And then I have like 5 countries listed, say, Botswana and Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, and maybe like a more difficult one like Mauritania or something. And I ask them to name those countries. And I'm always surprised. It's, the average has basically been the same for the last decade, and it's almost always, just above 1. So basically, the average student doesn't know much about their continent, and the implication is they also don't know anything about its history. And that's, to me, I would have expected that to be the case for students in Europe or the US perhaps, but it's it's really surprising that this is the case for African students, right? That we are so, maybe that's because of our South African exceptionalism, that we think that we are somehow
we're special.
Exactly. But it is a bit sad, and so partly again this book is it's dual purposed. In the one sense, I want to write to an international audience to tell them the stories of Africa, right? So put global economic history in an African perspective. But secondly, it's also important for our students, right, to and not only students, obviously the kind of general reader as well, to know that these stories also fit into a global story. That it's not just that somehow there are these industrial revolutions and Protestant reformations and all of these kind of big events, and then kind of African stories on the side. That it's actually that these stories are part of a kind of a global story, and I think that's I think we've been relatively successful in doing that. It's not always easy because the literature is kind of limited also on kind of African history and African economic history specifically. But I think these kind of anecdotes, the Mansa Musa one specifically, is a great way of getting into the 14th, 15th century, this amazing West African education and the preservation of literary resources, many of whom are now actually being kind of rediscovered. It's stories that we typically do not even think of, or certainly do much research about, and hopefully this will encourage more readers to look into them.